24-hour reading challenge. These have always been somewhat intimidating for me, even as someone who has been a lifelong reader and really values and looks nostalgically back on the time in childhood where you can be nose deep in a book and look up at the clock and hours have passed, the clock pre-cell phones. And I've been kind of chasing that feeling, and I think this weekend I need that feeling more than ever. And to kind of do this on easy mode, I also have a long weekend. And so while I anticipate some side quests for going out with a friend or getting my nails done because I have an appointment or preparing my December wrap-up video, I will have that extra day to try and make it happen. My coffee's still too hot, and I'm not going to beat myself up too much if I can't, just because the entire goal for me is to try to work through some of the books I have been meaning to read, as well as try to reset my brain a little bit so I'm not scrolling as much. And the social media landscape this weekend is on fire anyway, so hopefully that should be a little easier. Now, the first book I am going to try and finish, I've actually already started on KU, but I also have a library copy out, so I just saw that it was on KU when I had the library copy, and I figured I would give it the page flips on KU as well as I do like to have an ebook I'm reading for when I'm at that point of the evening where I no longer want to hold a book. So I have not decided what my backup books on there will be if and when I finish this one, but Accidentally His by Sabrina Jeffries. This is the last, I want to say, in a series that I have not read the others of, but I am a couple chapters into this and I am really enjoying it. We've got a spy element. Our female love interest clocks the male love interest right away, in the sense of he has some hidden identity in relation to his spying, and there may be some masked vigilante and or undercover espionage angles. I mean, there's the undercover espionage angles because we start there, but I am very excited to finish that one. That's been a lot of fun. So I'll probably move to another romance when I'm finished with that, but I don't know what. I also want to read The Trial of Anna Thalberg by Eduardo San Garcia and translated by Elizabeth Breyer, which is a narrative, very kind of short, as you can see, so I'm anticipating odd even just within some of the formatting in there. And I'm very interested in experimentation of form, but it is also a book about a witch trial, so that intrigues me as well. Next, this will probably be the last I try to squeeze in, just because I'm hopeful that this will be a Feature Friday possibility, and I guess you will know before I will if that has come to fruition, but Where the Dead Brides Gather by Nuzo Ono, which involves, according to the blurb, a supernatural possession, a vengeful ghost bride, a botched exorcism, and transportation to the realm of dead brides. So that sounds right up my alley. And also, I loved Ghost Bride by Yangzi Chu when that came out years and years ago. So I'm hopeful that this will give me a similar kind of feeling, while clearly being different in terms of tone, but we have that liminal space for sure. So that's going to be really exciting. Then we have another book I've already started, Sword Crossed by Freya Marsk. Now, I started this because it was due back at the library, but I didn't get it finished before it was due back. I was only like a chapter or two in, but then when I took it back to the library, because I will admit I had another book that was more immediately overdue in that it was putting some fines on my account, but Chicago has waived fines, so once you return the book, the fines go away, but I do feel guilty about a book that actually accrues fines instead of just renewing forever. So I took the books that needed to go back, but the librarian told me there wasn't actually a hold on this one anymore, so I could have it right back. And so based on that, I actually need to finish it. Another book I've partially started because I thought this was going to be a bedtime book, but I just haven't returned to it at bedtime. Opinions by Roxane Gay, which is her latest, though not new, collection of essays, which is just a compilation of a lot of her published essays that exist already, but I have not read all of them, and so I am interested. And also the essays appear very bite-sized in some ways, so it felt like something that ideally I could have popped into every night and read one essay a night, but I also could just pepper these essays in throughout the weekend as well. And you can see even in the intro I have already, well, no, you can't see. Even in the intro, I've already marked a couple passages just in terms of how she frames Opinion writing, for instance. Readers turn to opinion writing because they want help in parsing complex issues. In times of strife or tragedy, they may be seeking solace and community. They want to learn and be exposed to diverse modes of thought. They want help finding clarity on issues they find confusing or feel ambivalent about. And they want to read thoughtful, provocative, beautiful writing, which I would agree with, though there are, of course, opinion pieces I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, which also kind of circles into the other passage in this introduction that I marked. Those seeking a platonic ideal of discourse want people to be able to freely express their thoughts in a vacuum, without context or consequence. They want the airing of opinions to be nothing more than a harmless intellectual exercise. And I suppose for those whose lives are not materially affected by the issues on which they opine, that may be possible. If the right people agree with your opinions, or if they believe you have the right to express your opinions, they will respect them. They will engage with what you actually wrote rather than some shallow, facile reconstruction that better suits their own beliefs and agendas. And that is a kind of exploration or an offshoot of a thought about the kind of discourse cycle, especially on sites like the artist formerly known as Twitter and now Threads. And I think Threads, I'm seeing an exacerbated form of that, but that is opining for another day. The last book, ideally, and again, I'm a mood reader, so I have more books in more stacks that these could be swapped out at any point, but this is my kind of ideal focus, The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore. Do I have a copy of another A.K. Blakemore book that I bought at Indie Bookstore Day years ago that I have not yet read that is also about witches? Yes. I want to read this one first because it looks like weird historical fiction in the vein of like Perfume and or Sin Eater, both books that were fascinating to me and also a little disturbing. So I want to get back into my historical fiction groove where I find I respond to historical fiction the best, which is the weird, somewhat speculative in terms of the tone and the writing and things, you know, before the 20th century. So that is my ideal kind of lineup. I am realistic. I am not going to probably finish all of these books by any means. If I do, great, but we will see. But that is where I'm going to put my focus, and I reserve the right to switch out for other books that may be pulling me and my attention at any moment. But I do want to kind of prioritize these because I've got a bunch of 2025 releases in transit at the library. So I know that those are going to pull my focus and probably steal my attention coming up. So I want to swing back to some of these books that have fallen through the cracks, but that I am still very much interested in. There are just so many books and so little time, as you well know. So I'm going to give myself a moment to get situated, and then I'm going to give this a shot, and hopefully you'll come along for the ride. Also, hi, my name is Melody. We talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel, and if that sounds of interest to you, I would love for you to hang out more. And what do you know? We're going to hang out today in a slightly more cozy atmosphere, hopefully. So now's the perfect time to start. I forgot to start the stopwatch, so those few minutes didn't actually count. So we are starting for real now. For real. Putting that down, picking this up. Okay, I am just shy of 2 hours because I've been distracted sometimes, but trying to pause the timer if I get distracted by social media, but less than I have been historically, and I am just shy of 50%-ish of the way through Accidentally His as well. I am loving it. We are currently at a house party, and our hero Rafe has weaseled his way in to this house party where he is attempting to try and root out a spy for the French by kind of fake courting Verity, one of the women in charge of this house party. And Verity has had an engagement in badly in the past, being turned over by the man courting her. And so there are emotional stakes to that, as well as the fact that she, again, has him clocked as this potential masked man that has been at other events. Now, again, I have not read the other books in this series yet, though I definitely want to go back to them after reading this so far, but I don't have as much of that history. But even coming in just for this one, it's been a lot of fun so far, so very excited to finish that. I do think I want to do some lunch, but I don't want to make anything because I need to prep some food later tonight, ideally, to have things on hand, and I don't really feel like just doing that right now, and I still have chicken thawing. So I anticipate I'm going to meet up with my friend Mandy to go to this little gift shop she wants to go to that she heard about through complimenting someone at her regular bagel place. So we're gonna do that, and I may grab some lunch on the way, which means I will need to bring some books with me, and maybe I can do some reading out and about as a way to also keep me from wanting to nap. So gonna take Accidentally His, and then we'll need a backup just in case. We're being idealistic, especially if we are on this 24-hour schedule here. So I'm also gonna take The Glutton with me, I think, because this has been on my TBR the longest, and I would like to read it. So I think that that is where I am currently leaning toward going after my current read, but we will see. And in an effort to get as much time in as possible, I also will probably do an audiobook while I'm walking, and I am currently listening to a library copy of Perfume and Pain by Anna Dorn, and I'm about a half an hour into this at 1.65 speed currently because one was just way too slow. So I have a game plan, and I'm gonna stop dilly-dallying because there are only so many hours in the day. Okay, it is around 9:30. I have gotten in so far about 5.5 hours of reading time today, which is not great. And I will be promptly getting back into it after this because I need to average about 8 hours a day, a full-time job. And tomorrow I also have to record and edit a December wrap-up as well as have a nail appointment. So I don't know how much of my day I will have to read, but I did finish Accidentally His by Sabrina Jeffries. Now, again, I did read this mostly on my Kindle so that we got the page flips for that, but I really loved this one. And I actually went back because I've like read a couple of Sabrina Jeffries here or there, but she's never like been a go-to author in that I'm reading every release that comes out, and I definitely think I'm going to have to swing back and fill in some gaps there because I really loved this book. And in going back, I realized I read some in high school, like 2007, 2008, that I also really enjoyed. So clearly I have been missing out. And this one, as I mentioned before, was an espionage historical romance set during the Napoleonic Wars, and I eat that up. If you remember, I did a reread vlog-ish thing for The Secret History of the Pink Carnation, the first book in that series, which I absolutely loved. Again, I first read that one in high school, and I haven't been reading a whole lot in the vein of historical romances with that espionage angle. I'm excited because if you watched my January anticipated video, it feels like there will be multiple books in January coming out that are also taking that kind of bend to things. Whether they're all in the Napoleonic era, I can't comment on, but odds are decent for historical romance. So I really enjoyed this one. And part of what I really loved, as I mentioned before, Rafe, our spy hero who has infiltrated this family basically because he suspects someone of passing on information to the French. And not only that, his uncle, who was also in espionage and Rafe grew up with as his kind of father figure because because his father and mother died when he was a baby. His uncle had been compromised in his mission and shot, and has been facing repercussions of that and hasn't been right in the mind since, because he was shot in the head. And so Rafe is trying to get to the bottom of this from, a political angle and from a career standpoint, but also from a very emotionally driven, close to home standpoint. And then we have Verity, who is a very strong-willed woman who kind of clocks Rafe from the beginning. And so we do have this element of like secret identity, but as a reader, we know that she suspects him the whole time, which is kind of fun. And so the way that these secret identities and the way the lies of spying and the lies necessitated by spying play out is really satisfying, and the kind of equalness between these two, as well as the kind of sense that Rafe, while this really renowned spy within the government and the perception of that, like how good is he really? And the fact that Verity clocks him right away. And I mean, not necessarily the spy angle, but she knows that he has had some secret identities and has been moving in their circles. So that was really fun. I think we could have gone even further on that actually, but I really enjoyed that element. And also because the spy thing is in play, that means that there is this outside antagonist and this outside danger, which from historical romance I really enjoy, as well as the stakes of their relationship and how their relationship progressed, because he was courting her kind of as cover and never meant for that to be anything more. Of course, feelings get involved, but there are some outside kind of instigators in terms of what directions their relationship moves that fall under tropes that I particularly like. So yeah, I would very much recommend picking up Accidentally His by Sabrina Jeffries, and I personally do need then to swing back and read the other sisters' books because I enjoyed them in the background, and I'm sure I will enjoy them all the more after having gotten their stories. But I did enjoy, as a romance reader, knowing that they were so present and their husbands were so present in this book as well, in the sense that as a reader who would have read their stories ideally before this book, getting still that time with characters I have presumably already fallen in love with. So yeah, I had a great time with that. And while I took The Glutton with me as a backup when I was out and about before and with Mandy, I didn't actually get to it, but I do think this is where I'm going to move next. And as I am so behind, I'm going to go ahead and dive into this now and just anticipate a lot of woefully attempted pronunciation on the French here when I report back, but we will see. Okay, I had mentioned before that I was anticipating this book being kind of similar to Sin Eater and Perfume in terms of its kind of like visceral and kind of grotesque exploration of a very specific side of history. Maybe. And I'm only 7 pages in, but I do think we are maybe along correct lines there, and it is already kind of grotesque. So in terms of like what this character has potentially consumed, and we will see what the reality is, I'm very interested in that, but I do want to give that warning right off the bat. Yes. That is all I am prepared to say at this time. I'm going to read the blurb here. This may or may not stay in. 1798 France. Nuns move along the dark corridors of a Versailles hospital where the young Sister Perpétue has been tasked with sitting with the patient who must always be watched. Gaunt and ailing, the man is rumored to have eaten a golden fork that is killing him from the inside. What's more, he is said to have done monstrous things in his attempt to sate an insatiable appetite. The potentially monstrous things are mentioned as early as page 6. But such frightful stories can hardly be true. Sister Perpétue will plunge into the darkness to find out for herself. And all at once, the bewitching, terrible tale of the great Terreur begins to unfold. Born in an impoverished village to a widowed young mother, Terreur was once overflowing with quiet affection for the baby Jesus and the many saints, for his mother, for the plants and little creatures in the woods and fields around their house. He spends his days alone, observing the delicate charms of the countryside. but his world is not a gentle one, and soon life as he knows it is violently upended. Okay, it is apparently Tara. Tara? I didn't take French, I took Spanish, and even my Spanish is embarrassing enough in terms of the fact that I have trouble rolling my R's. I will do my best. Tara is pitched down a chaotic path through revolutionary France, left to the mercy of strangers and increasingly bottomlessly ravenous. The glutton paints a richly imagined life for Tara, the glutton of lion, in an epic story of hunger, not only for food, but also for comfort, beauty, and belonging. So I am very intrigued, but yeah, it gets dark right away, and if it invokes similar sensory details that Sin Eater and Perfume do, that may be a stumbling block for some, so just want to warn about that. But I am intrigued despite this. Hi, let's go ahead and talk about how badly I failed this 24-hour reading challenge, shall we? I mean, honestly, I feel like I kind of set myself up for knowing that maybe I couldn't do it even on easy mode, so maybe I planted the seed for myself. I don't know. It is inevitably my fault, and it also inevitably does not matter in the grand scheme of things. But I was doing this over the long weekend with Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which also, I think, really levels our expectations in terms of what was going on. And I really thought, in my delusional heart of hearts, that with TikTok going dark, this would be the perfect kind of distraction from all of the noise and chatter around that. What I did not anticipate was the stunt of it all. So Saturday I actually did really good. I got in my 8 hours of reading, which I needed to average over the 3 days, which seems completely feasible, right? That is a work day of reading. I love to read, no problems there. But then for like the end of Saturday, I started to get kind of distracted by the like goodbye TikTok videos. And I also needed to panic, make sure I saved a couple of recipes, including one that I intended to make Sunday, and I did. But I got distracted by that. And then Sunday I was distracted by it coming back up, and I wasn't actively on the app because honestly, the messaging around the whole thing, which we're not gonna rehash here, but it made me really angry. But I was reading some commentary about it. And then Monday was Monday, and also very cold. So I don't know. I did still read though, and we are going to talk about that. So of the mountain of books I showed you at the beginning of this, which to be fair was already ambitious, I had no expectations that I was going to finish all of those books over the course of a weekend. Do not worry. However, I ended up finishing 2, and I think I have light DNF'd an audiobook. So let's go ahead and get into it and kind of just try to quickly wrap up the reading. We've already talked about Accidentally His by Sabrina Jeffries, which is the first book I finished. I was like on chapter 3, I want to say, when we started, or when I started this challenge. So I was only about like 24, 25 pages in, and I read the rest of this on Saturday. And I really enjoyed this, as we have already established, and I've actually already checked out a couple more Sabrina Jeffries titles because I'm like, why have I been sleeping on Sabrina Jeffries? And I may have already said as well, I went back into Goodreads and like was looking, and I've read or had read a couple Sabrina Jeffries, especially in high school, and rated them very highly, but just haven't circled back. I'm also very excited because in our January Anticipated, we talked about a lot of historical romances coming out that kind of fit in that espionage kind of trope or subgenre of historical, and I had such a fun time with this. I'm like, oh, I really want to get back into reading more of those. And it was just a nice reminder that I actually really do enjoy those narratives. Again, it also allows for outside instigators a lot more. There is a lot to be said for that, so I'm very excited. But that was a 2024 historical romance release. But honestly, I do still have a number of, thankfully, historical romance releases on my radar for this year. And whether I have them pre-ordered on Kobo or physically or not, I do know and am thankful that I can trust that the Chicago library system will have my back and I will be able to get my hand on that book. Speaking of the Chicago Public Library system, the next book that I have potentially light DNF'd, I was listening to Perfume and Pain by Anna Dorn on Libby, and I got about 22% in based on where my Libby loan is currently sitting, because I haven't returned it because I was like, well, maybe I'm just not in the mood. I've seen really great reviews for this book online, especially on Instagram. It's one of those lit fics with a kind of like prickly heroine, and I appreciate the more complex female characterizations and having protagonists that we don't necessarily like. But at the same time, with that, I need a reason to be engaged or invested in the story. And I think the appeal for this one is just how messy our protagonist is being. And because we are in her head, we are seeing her justify this mess in a lot of ways. And I don't know, maybe the audiobook is just too close for comfort for me because it feels like spending really distilled time with the absolute worst person you know, and like the person on the outskirts of the friend group. Or maybe this is just me because I move in a lot of artistic friend groups historically, but like the most self-indulgent, pretentious person you know that is really sure of their own artistic genius when honestly they are not doing anything super revolutionary. And here we have a character who is aging and really kind of values being shocking, or has aged out of being progressive in a lot of ways in terms of her thinking in a way that she is clearly struggling with, but then values being shocking rather than kind of still constantly interrogating her point of view. And I think there is a lot of commentary there to be had and that the book is having. I just don't like this person, so I'm really struggling with that. And I think that if I was reading it, because it is a very fast-paced, short, distilled book, I think I would appreciate it more. I do wonder, because I haven't fully gotten there yet within the book, the perfume side of things and this sense of smell and how we kind of perceive fragrance, especially as niches online have moved so quickly. And I don't know that this book is in direct conversation with whatever niche online happens to be popular at the moment, but like the fragrance community had like really spiked within the last year or so. And so I don't know if it is in relation to that and kind of a commentary, kind of a side door commentary on some of that as well, in the way that a lot of the books I'm really enjoying kind of twist beauty standards and the beauty community in some ways. I don't know. That's a lot of philosophizing for a book that I haven't even read a quarter of. But if you think I should finish that book in some form, let me know. I do appreciate, in some ways, the narration perspective and what it is attempting to do without finding enjoyment in it. Speaking of appreciating without finding enjoyment, let's go ahead and finish talking about The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore, which we started and chatted about very, very briefly Saturday night. And I, even within the first few pages, got to some disturbing revelations within the text that, you know, I'm going to put some trigger warnings both for how eating and consumption is explored and talked about in this book, because I know I read Sin Eater by Megan Campisi years and years ago when it came out, I think 2020, and I really love that book. However, I had friends who read that book who expressed real struggle with the way that eating was framed and discussed in that book. And I think the same could be said here, both for the depictions and some of the things our character is talked about consuming, including something referenced very early that honestly, by the time I woke up and continued reading the next day, I had convinced myself that we were going to reframe that completely. So I was wrong, but I convinced myself of that because especially we often see these historical fiction narratives, especially that are based around real figures. As this is, I Googled it. It is based on The Glutton of Leon. And again, many apologies for my French pronunciations. And so often we see this kind of twisting of the narrative or this re-examination of the historical record, which we do still see here, but it is not a re-examination that absolves this character necessarily in any way. At the same time, I fully expected going into this that its explorations of hunger and gluttony within the context of this man that has kind of baffled the historical record medically in terms of how he could consume so much, even when it wasn't what we would consider food, and also how he didn't gain weight traditionally as you would assume you would with that level of consumption. And so the exploration of weight in relation to this isn't in the picture beyond the kind of medical bafflement of it not having the normal cause and effect you would expect. However, there is this emphasis, right, on the hunger and the insatiable quality of the hunger that is perfectly primed, especially within the setting of revolutionary France, to be very symbolic. And it is in many ways, and also is less symbolic than I expected in some as well. And so I really like the framing device of this novel because we start with this man appearing at a hospital, and the doctor is writing another doctor explaining how this man has shown up, and he is slowly dying because he has eaten a golden fork. And we don't really fully explore that, and I'm sure that in and of itself is symbolic if I really sit with it. And I'm not gonna lie, for a long time reading the book, I was like, he's not really dying, he's not actually in danger, this is just a vehicle to get his story, which it is and isn't at the same time. The danger to his life from that is very present, which is also interesting in context of all of the things he has eaten that didn't threaten his life. But we get the story, or his story, through the context of him kind of recounting this to a nun who is kind of observing his bedside, and he always has to be observed based on some acts that he has been known for or is known for, and some crimes that make him a danger to people in some ways. And I think it's supposed to challenge that. We as a reader are supposed to kind of question whether this is true or it's part of the myth and legend that had been built up around him. And I don't know if I fully unpacked the fallout of it and where the narrative lands on whether it is true or not. But when he's starting to tell this story to the nun, it starts with this idea of him really trying to shock her. And he kind of starts recounting his life, going back to childhood. And there's a real grit to the narrative and a kind of shocking nature in some ways. I mean, the concept itself is shocking, so I think leaning into it makes sense. But it is interesting in context of, I have talked a lot about narratives that I think kind of try to shock you just for the sake of trying to shock you, and I don't always find that successful. I find it really frustrating, actually. I feel like it's manipulative and I don't appreciate it as a reader. At the same time, as a reader, I'm not necessarily opposed to that more gritty, more shocking exploration. And so in some ways, I would still frame this, and I know I've referenced some of these books already, even when I started, I would still frame this in context of books like Sin Eater by Megan Campisi, Perfume by Peter Suskind, Little by Edward Carey, and honestly, a more successful version of Lapfona by Otessa Moshfegh, though to be fair, in my reading experience, it's hard to be a less successful version of Lapfona. So there is a lot of darkness to the exploration, but also there is a kind of dark humor that is often explored through like dramatic irony, in the sense of we can get a measure for this character before he really can. And his early life is not necessarily marked or defined by hunger. It's more marked by his naivete and his kind of unawareness of the larger world, even within a world that is very harsh. And so there is that kind of humor of him being so disconnected, which is kind of hard in terms of the narrative to reconcile that with this man who is taking glee in how he is recounting this to this nun to kind of shock her and disturb her, and also on some level having these kind of theological debates about if he is evil, essentially. And so there is a sharpness to that exploration that is not evident in his early life, and it's also hard for me to kind of reconcile and find as we go along with him. So I read just like a brief kind of summary of this person as a historical figure, and I don't think the historical record knows, when this hunger, this insatiable hunger developed, and there is a very clear kind of demarcation of it in the narrative of when it started. And that for me is really symbolic in and of itself, and it's a clear, demarcation, a clear changing of circumstance when that happens. And so I really was trying to kind of frame this hunger within the context of him and his character journey, because it's when he is kind of thrust into the wider world without really the tools to meet the wider world, but there is then this framing of this hunger for the wider world, the good and the bad. And it's also within the context of seeing, even, in his village as well, but also breaking out and seeing the wider picture of France on the brink of revolution. And honestly, I would be shocked if we don't start seeing a return of historical fiction kind of set within this kind of era. Even reading this and reading this on the weekend I was reading this, I was also feeling the urge to return to A Tale of Two Cities. And so we are in that same kind of space within this book. And honestly, I think the parallels to the modern moment are obviously there. Now, this book came out in 2023, but I do think it is speaking to a lot of things. And I will be very interested to see where historical fiction goes. I have historically been a fan of historical fiction, but as I said before, I really gravitate toward older historical fiction, like pre-20th century, though I am still interested in the Gilded Age too, but it's on that kind of cusp. But we have been really flooded with historical fiction kind of set, especially World War II, the last, I would argue, decade. Like from the moment I moved to Chicago and started selling books, which was in the era of The Nightingale and All the Light We Cannot See. And I'm gonna be real with you for a moment. I've been kind of spiraling the last week about the fact that we have seen a constant popularity of World War II narratives, especially within the last decade. I know they've always kind of been popular, and yet we are still in this exact moment. And it fills me with a lot of despair and a lot of rage, but a lot of things right now do. Anyway, I do think there are parallels that can be explored with the modern moment and especially the French Revolution in terms of taking things to their extreme and the kind of heightened nature of everything, allowing us to explore the ugliness and the messiness in this larger than life in some ways way. But at the same time, this book and books of its ilk in terms of like some of those comparisons, which are not all within the same time period of exploration, little is. Anyway, there is this kind of emphasis on the body and the real kind of like, I don't want to say earthiness isn't the right word, but just recognizing the body for all of its grossness that we in modern society really try to hide and ignore the realities of how quickly a body can devolve. And this is kind of looking at that kind of devolving in some ways while being paralleled against the fall of society in whatever way and these social norms and the kind of pitting of things. At the same time, it does kind of remove us or keep the revolution at a distance in some ways. It is clearly present, but our character also exists in a weird kind of proximity to it. He spends the middle part of the book kind of running with these con artists, essentially, that move from place to place as they're traveling to Paris. And so there is that sense that things will change in whatever way when they get to Paris, while at the same time we are seeing these kind of precursors to revolutionary thought even on the road to Paris. The fact that they are on the road and the kind of symbolism of that, there is a lot to unpack even within a relatively short book. This is just about 300 pages. And so there's a lot packed in there, and the language is very evocative, it's very specific, but it also moves very quickly. And I was on board for most of the book, especially with this kind of symbolism that was being set up. However, in the last third, I do feel like it kind of devolved a bit and kind of lost its way in the sense of I no longer was very firm on why I cared as a reader because it didn't really feel like we were going anywhere in particular. And at the same time, I do recognize and respect that we are kind of following a character who is on the whims of fate of this larger system, and he falls within the larger system and is used by the system even in relation to this hunger, and how he in some ways is eaten by his own hunger. I don't know, there's a lot to unpack here, and in the back third, a lot of that grotesque nature of things, it feels heightened in some ways, but no longer feels tied to a larger conversation as tangibly. And so especially when we get to like that big moment, that big reveal that kind of circles us back to the first few pages, it doesn't reframe anything for me in a substantial enough way to feel earned. And so then that moment feels more like it is about the shock value in some ways. I don't feel as tricked and angry about it as I do in some narratives by any means, but it is a shocking moment. There are a lot of descriptions here, and while I do feel like she tries to pull back from like only living in the grotesque and the disgusting, there are some very disgusting descriptions. And I've been dealing with kind of a weak stomach over the course of January, so I did have to kind of stop and start in some moments. So when I first started the book Saturday night, I expected to breeze right through it. I was feeling very sure of myself in relation to finishing this book, but I think I did need to kind of stop and start and sit with things a little bit. I got distracted by the internet, and ultimately it did take me a little longer to finish than I expected. And then once I finished that, I just didn't really have enough time to get far enough into another book to really talk about it. I was going to start Where the Dead Brides Gather, as discussed in my stack, because I anticipated talking about it in a Feature Friday, but then I saw the Starlight Air was available on Kindle Unlimited, and we have already discussed that in a Feature Friday, and so I read that instead. I fully anticipated more of my library holds to have arrived by the time I'd read that book in order to talk about them in an upcoming Feature Friday, because most of them were already in transit last weekend when all of this was going on, but they have not arrived yet. So I'm just gonna cross my fingers. None of them are lost in transit, and it's just like the beginning of the year kind of delay, because I was first on the list for all of these books. Maybe it was just like they started the in transit process as they were processing. I don't know. I'm just gonna hope that they actually get to me, because this is what is supposedly in transit to me. The Favorites, Gate to Kagoshima, which I honestly didn't believe because it started its in transit earlier than it came out, so I had questions there. Immortal, which I'm very anxious for. I really wanted to talk about this book already. Watermoon and We Do Not Part are all on their way to me, so hopefully we get some of those, or I get some of those soon, because I want to read them. So yeah, that was my failed 24-hour reading challenge. I still read, so it was not a failure in that sense, but I did not read as much as I anticipated, and I did not complete the 24 hours. I cannot tell you how many hours I completed because I accidentally deleted the timer, and by Monday, I was reading without still timing because I knew I had already failed. So maybe next time I will do better, but it was a great exercise to allow me to kind of read some of the books that have been sitting on my stack, especially before some of these 2025 releases start trickling in. So hopefully we'll be able to hang out and read more books together in a similar format this year, if that sounds of interest. Also, if you think I should prioritize any of the books from the stack I introduced that I have not yet read, let me know. But thanks for hanging out with me as I attempted this exercise and listening to my thoughts on these books. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good. And yeah,